but we're starting off with terrific with a capital T. That is Michelle Dunaway. She is one of the great artists of our time. We have covered her many times in Fine Art Connoisseur magazine. She's become quite a friend to all of us on the Streamline team over the past decade. The fact is that we were absolutely thrilled when she accepted our invitation to do a demo this year as part of Realism Live #3. Then, to our delight, Michelle came up with an idea that sounded quite interesting, and that was to paint a portrait of me. Now, obviously, Eric has his portrait painted on a regular basis as part of the publisher letter section of Fine Art Connoisseur magazine, but I usually don't have my portrait painted because I'm more, well, I kind of don't want to parallel it. I want to do my own thing, and that's mainly just a headshot taken by a photographer friend. I was intrigued by the idea that Michelle would paint me and record that painting process as the demo for Realism Live. And indeed, that's exactly what has come to pass. Now, the amazing thing here as well is that Michelle was busy traveling. She went to South Africa just this fall and apparently had a wonderful time. And so therefore we had to juggle this sitting by me with her painting me live against her travel schedule, which of course was complex given the distance that she was traveling. The good news is that last month she came to visit me in New York, came to my apartment, and we sat together for much of a day, much of an afternoon at least. And we, well, she painted me, and you're going to see the results of that as we go through the next hour. Just worth pointing out the magic of this sort of technology. She was using a brand new camera, which took beautiful imagery. And also our friend, the artist Libby Whipple, was in the room, and she was taking some video shots that will also appear in what you're about to see. So it was a really interactive experience. Obviously, Michelle and I were chatting along the whole way. The resulting 1-hour film is gorgeous and hopefully will be very inspiring to you in terms of watching her technique up close. But I just want to point out this now is going to be a live event. This is where Realism Live really kicks in. There may be a bit of a lag between the film footage and the discussion that Michelle and I are about to have right now. So please be patient. Don't worry, this is not pre-recorded. This is all live, and we're just going to hope that the technology sees us through. I'm going to point out that your questions about what you see and what you hear should be put into the chat, and our moderators on the Streamline team will compile them for us. Then I will be able to, at the end of the film, do a proper Q&A session with Michelle, and we will get to your questions from the chat stream, thanks to our moderators. So you will be heard, I promise. I'll have my own questions, but I'm certainly going to want to hear what yours are as well. So let me now try to work with our fabulous team in the studio to get the video up and running, but I want to see if we can get Michelle on camera. I don't know. Please, I'm juggling a bunch of screens here, so let's see. Oh, there she is. I see Michelle.
Hello. Hi, Peter.
Okay, there she is.
Oh,
and she's got a portrait behind her. Great.
Yes, rather handsome
Excellent.
portrait. Due to the subject.
Okay. Fantastic. I'm now going to sign off of my my phone. Hang on one second. Okay, Michelle, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Fantastic. That's great. Okay, so here we are. Now, I'm in New York and Michelle is in New Mexico. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, see the power of technology. I love it.
It's wonderful. It makes the world small.
Good to see you again, Michelle.
You too. We had so much fun. I'm really glad we can include the audience in this whole demo, this event that we did that day.
Absolutely right. I am so grateful to you for all the care you took in setting me up. I think that was an interesting aspect of the project, that the pose is so crucial. And I think that when we live in a world of photography where things are repeatable, like you can take 1,000 photos with your phone of someone and choose the shot that you want best. When you're staging a portrait that's painted, you better have that pose perfect to the satisfaction of the artist. And that was a very intense investment of time. It wasn't even that long, but it was very thoughtful and intentional on your part.
Oh, thank you. I think, you know, getting a good start is something Richard Schmidt always talked about, taking your time to set up the pose. Other friends of mine as well that I would paint with, I observed that how important that is, even when I was a young artist. we tend to want to rush and learn techniques, but setting up your model, making sure the model feels comfortable, from experience, I was sitting there scrutinizing you and I made sure to tell you, I'm looking at the shadows. You look nice from every angle, but I'm looking at the light and shadows. And it's important because we all feel self-conscious being looked at intensely, especially by an artist that's going to capture every nuance. And so having the model feel comfortable is so key. And you and I had a great conversation. We had to take that audio out so we can speak live today.
Yes.
But I like to do that with my models rather than have them static, is get to know them and subtly imbue the portrait with some aspects of their personality.
Absolutely right. Now, I should point out that the actual finished portrait is behind Michelle right now in New Mexico. I did have a chance to see it in an earlier conversation we had this week. So I'm thrilled, and I congratulate you on capturing my weirdness. It's just so great to have something like that in the world.
I've known you for many years, and I feel like what I know is a mix of intelligence with the culture and history of art mixed with your wit and humor. And I wanted to capture that juxtaposition in your pose and in the painting. And I wish it was better lit, but I have this lit for Zoom, but I will be showing close-ups of the painting during the video.
Exactly. That's right. Well, thank you. That's all very kind. And it was a thrill to be with you and to watch from my perspective what you were doing. I want to point out now, what's exciting for me is I have not seen this film. I've only seen a few clips. So I'm watching with the audience to see what happened on the other side of the easel. I was the one, unable to watch the hand moving in any detail because I was having to sit still. So this is a real thrill.
And that's actually really exciting for me to get to see you watch it for the first time. Generally, when I'm painting someone, if I can, I put a mirror behind me so they can kind of watch during the process, especially if I have them pose looking at me. But because of the camera and reflections on the canvas, we couldn't do that. So I'm really excited to get to watch you watch the process of your face being painted.
So before we start the film, I know the team is ready to go. I just wanted to point out that Michelle's biography is in the program booklet. So if you want to learn more about her work and how to reach her, it's there. I didn't want to spend time on the introduction. It's a long one because she's so accomplished. And I thought that it would be more useful for us to focus on this new project, which is truly new. I mean, this is the first public showing of this portrait. So we're going to focus on innovative today. Okay, so I see a hand moving, and I don't know if we're ready to launch.
Quick note, I'll just add on to what you said. Oh, they're starting. Okay.
Okay, super. Yep. Oh, that's right. This is the rapid. This is the kind of quick overview that I think you did toward the beginning. Is that right?
Just a fun little intro.
Great.
And to see the space we're in. Your home office, of course, and
right.
Yeah, just setting up the pose, and this is just a quick 30 seconds, and then we'll get into the now. Just to add a caboose onto what you said, I'm not going to go into my palette. My palette's on my website. If you go under my workshop, scroll to the bottom, you can see my entire palette and supplies I'm using. This is just about the process and philosophy of painting.
Exactly. That's a very important point. It seems to me that Michelle has been so thoughtful about preparing this film. She's a great editor, by the way. I saw that much in the clips that I did get to see, that there is this real practicality that she wants you to see how it went down. And I'm just as interested. I should point out that the office that you're looking at is my home office in New York City. So Michelle was using a rather tricky setting. It's not a huge room, and there was very strong light from the west, from a big window overlooking the Hudson River. So she made the very best of a challenging situation.
And that's how it is when you start from life. And I should preface too that, what attendees are seeing here is something I've never shown before at another art conference. And I've taught extensively at other conferences, but, I believe everything happens for a reason. We had planned to paint this entirely from life. About an hour or less than an hour into it, about 45 minutes into it, storm clouds came in on the horizon, our light was gone. And so that forced me to have to finish in the studio from a photograph. Now, this is a practice that I commonly use when I do portrait commissions. I'd love to paint from life 100% of the time, but that's just not feasibly practical, for two reasons. People can't, if they live in another state or another country, they can't sit for long. And also sometimes I'll be painting someone in a transitory moment and in a position that they can't hold, or outdoors in natural light. So I thought, what a perfect, take a challenge, turn it into an opportunity and a lesson. What a perfect example to teach people how you start something from live, and the second half of the videos, how you continue it in the studio.
I'm so glad you set that up. Thank you. That's very helpful for people to understand, first of all, what we're doing today has these two halves, but also that is the real world. I mean, let's face it, that not every project we undertake is going to go to schedule, because people are different. Weather is different. In the plein air painting world, that's obvious. Of course, it could start raining any minute, but even with a studio work or a work in an interior, there will be changes around you that you cannot fully anticipate. So there you were, nimble as ever, and you got it done. I'm sorry that I wasn't around for all of it, but you obviously, you worked away.
In the studio, it would have been easier. It's always challenging working from a photo, and I'll address those challenges in the second half. But I think, yes, portrait painters, we have a tendency sometimes to expect everything to be static. It's very different from painting outdoors. And I try to do both. And as I painted more plein air, it's helped me to find a little bit of a looser practice with my portrait painting, not looser as far as technique, but again, it's something I learned observing Richard Schmidt and Nancy Guzik, that they would have the models talk. They wouldn't be concerned about the models sitting exactly still. And that made for a more just emotive portrait and a more authentic experience. And it's more fun because you're not so focused on getting a finished product that you miss the experience of the painting process. And that is key. Like, to attendees, if you take nothing else from this demo, just take this, that the artwork needs to be a byproduct of the experience, not the end goal. The experience is to live in a way in which you appreciate life and appreciate the person in front of you, and you're trying to honor them by bringing in a bit of their essence onto the canvas. And if you enjoy talking to them and getting to know them and capturing just a touch of that, not seeking perfection, but excellence, because
Yes.
perfection is fear-based, excellence faith-based, then you end up with a better painting. You actually end up with a better end result. And so I don't get like really strident about lighting or the situation being perfect, because sometimes beautiful things come from unexpected moments. In fact, the most beautiful things. And so, I hope this presentation is a result of that, or an example of that.
It sure is. And I think that's super helpful for me to hear as the consumer, because I'm more likely to be sitting for a commissioned portrait than making one. I can't draw a stick figure. So I love that idea that when I'm talking with people out in the world, that they should not look at that sitting process as something nerve-wracking or something that is to be dreaded or needs to be perfect, that this is a dialogue between artist and sitter. And of course, we all want a lovely result, but the fact is that that experience, that process is part of the journey. And that should be made more clear in some ways to people who are in a position to commission, necessarily know that they should also be enjoying it, by the way.
Yes,
That's interesting.
I have with every client for a commission, even if we're just taking photographs. Sometimes, I don't have, they can't sit from live, but I paint enough from live so I know what to change in a portrait working from a photo, which I'll discuss later. But the first half of my meeting is always assuring them that my job and my goal is to present them in the best light, to be authentic to who they are. I'm not into idealizing people. I think people's unique attributes are beautiful. And so I want to heighten that, but I want to show someone on their best day, on their most well-rested day, on their most inspired day, so that when they see that portrait, they remember that, who they are as a person. That's the goal. And other people that maybe haven't met them years from now will feel like they get a sense of who they are by looking at the portrait. At least that's my goal as a portrait artist.
That's a great way to look at it. Absolutely. Now, I should point out, Michelle, as I'm looking at the feed of the film, you can chime in anytime you want with some observations about technical or, procedural. I'm not trying to rush that. I just wanted to not get in the way of it. So as we move forward. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And, we are going to be doing a live Q&A for 20 minutes after. So if you have any questions on technique or process, please ask me. One of the nice things is Realism Live is scheduled directly after that. After this presentation, I have a 10-minute portrait demonstration featuring Royal Talens paint, Rembrandt paint. I speak nonstop about technique and color mixing during that. So stay tuned for that afterwards. And it's a similar type of portrait, and I'll be going into my palette and you'll see color mixing. So you'll definitely get some of that immediately following this presentation. But generally, I'll just make a quick note for those of you who haven't seen me demo before. I really like to start from the focal point and work my way out. It's how I drew as a kid. And then I went to art school and was taught, no, you can't do that. You have to block in the whole head. And we all know sometimes if you block in the whole head, unless you draw it precisely, things can get too big or too small, or too much space or too little space between the features. And then on the other side, if we draw it too precisely before we lay in paint, we don't want to go outside of those lines. And we don't want to create interesting edges. I love beautiful edges. It's why I love Richard Schmid's work, Nancy Guzik, John Singer Sargent, Cecilia Bow, Anders Zorn, Soroya, I could go on and on. But to find interesting edges, you have to be willing to lose your drawing and trust your ability to refine your drawing. And I don't know what it is when a precise line is there, we don't want to deviate from it. And I think it goes back to our coloring book days, like don't go outside of the lines.
Absolutely.
But to me, edges are the music in a painting. Like, I think there's so many correlations between painting and music. And so I almost see as getting the anatomy in the right place, getting the drawing and the shapes correctly. And when I refer to drawing, I mean the shapes of color and value. That's like hitting the right notes on a piano if you're playing a piano concerto. But the edges and the brush strokes are how the notes are played. And that to me is something that I'm really interested in, because that's the emotive quality in a painting.
So if I can add that what I sensed as we were sitting together was that you were completely calm. You're a seasoned professional, you know what you're doing, and that was clear. But also, I think part of this is what you just said about looking for not the precise line, not being a worrywart, sort of going with the flow, refinding this and that, adds to the pleasure on the artist side. Again, I was talking earlier about the client and their anxiety, but there's also potentially the worry on the artist's side of, oh, it doesn't look quite right, or, I didn't keep within the line. We need to let that go. That your process is very inspiring, I think, to some practitioners, especially emerging ones we're training, that they shouldn't be that anxious and aggravated. They should just enjoy and follow your advice about how to proceed.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. It's, to me, one of the most important aspects of painting, especially portrait painting. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but the last thing I'm worried about in a session from life, a limited session, is getting a likeness. I know that sounds bizarre because I'm doing a portrait, but getting a likeness is really, once you've established the basic value structure, the shapes of the features, getting an exact likeness is pushing and pulling those features, microscopic amounts to get the exact spatial relationships. So a quick study from life, it can sometimes look like, sometimes you'll hit a likeness, but sometimes it'll look like someone's brother or sister. It's like a close relative. And then going into getting an exact likeness just is many more hours at the easel. This one, I feel like I hit the likeness pretty fast, I think, because I know you and I've studied you and been saying I wanted to paint you for years. And we're very relaxed around each other. So what I'm really concentrating on as the artist is I'm looking at light and shadow, colored shapes, asking myself, what is the value of something? What is the chroma of something? Whether it's a warm or cool color temperature. And again, I'll go more into detail in that in the next presentation with Royal Talens. But, and I'm laying it out almost like if you think of like putting a jigsaw puzzle together. And that to me is really fun. It's just exciting because I get as excited at this point in the process, seeing your eye emerge and starting to see, oh, there's Peter on my canvas coming out of like this mess of paint.
Yeah.
That it just keeps me focused and enthusiastic throughout the painting process. And something I always tell my students is that if you're not inspired painting it, no one else is going to be inspired looking at it. Sometimes we feel there's this misconception that we have to like struggle and suffer to create great art. And I believed that when I was younger. And I finally realized that no, you have to fall in love with the process and enjoy laying on the paint and mixing the paint and have fun with it, just like you did as a kid. And sure, you are using all your faculties and intelligence and knowledge and skill to do it well, but that can't supersede the joy of like looking at someone's face, translating it into color mixtures and shapes, and creating something that hasn't existed before. That has to be the most paramount thing.
I love
You
it.
know, I
Absolutely.
remember when I learned this, I was in my 20s and I was painting a portrait at a friend's house. She had a little 5-year-old girl, and the little girl comes in, sees the blank canvas. Half an hour later, comes in and sees a little girl's face on the canvas, and she said, "What you do is like Harry Potter. There was nothing there, and now there's something there." And I realized that that's the magic that we have to kind of get into that mindset and just enjoy it, the process, and enjoy being with that person. And then the byproduct is usually a much better painting than if we were trying to force it
Right.
to come out on
Agreed.
canvas.
Now, I love your analogy of a puzzle. That's really interesting that you've got all these pieces before you.
Mm.
They're either literally on the canvas because you made a big mess of paint, and now you got to clean it up, but also you have other bits of yourself and your knowledge that are going to inform the arranging of the pieces. Let me come to something that you touched upon when you talked about your idols like Sargent and Sorolla or Zorn, and not to mention Richard Schmid and Nancy Guzik. The question of, do you, in the process that we're looking at right now, do you find yourself thinking, oh, I've got a little challenge here. This is how Sargent solved that. Like, is it as literal as that? Or is it just a kind of mass of having looked in museums for decades now, you just sort of have that set of tools that you know how to fix this?
Yeah, I think the latter. That's a really great question. No one's ever asked me that. I think when I was starting out portrait painting in my 20s and early 30s, I was like, I would look, if I couldn't figure out how to solve something, I would look at how the greats solved things.
Yeah.
But in the past, like 15 years, it's been more like I just have an accumulation of knowledge of things I studying originals from life in museums is, I think, essential to being an artist. Anytime I'm in a city, I go find out where a museum is. If I have to drive 2 hours and then run to the airport right after seeing a Sargent painting, I'll do it, because there's nothing gives you a greater education. And I also study the paintings with intention. I stand, and this is a practice I've shared with my students, and it's very helpful. I'll stand in front of a Sargent painting and pretend I'm painting it. And then it'll show me things that I need
Right.
to learn, because I'll see, oh, okay, I would think to do this. I would think to do this. Oh, I wouldn't think to do that. Why did he do that? Dissect it and figure out
Excellent.
why it works. The same way with your own paintings, you should be looking at them and figure out what works and figure out what doesn't work to kind of be your own best teacher. Even with all the great instruction we have, and this conference is one of them, we have to be responsible for our own learning as well. And most of that is looking at life with a critical eye. I always tell students and believe wholeheartedly that 50%, if not more, of painting is learning how to see and perceive nature and really understand what you're seeing. And then you figure out technically how to do it.
Love that. And also, if I may say, that's a total hallelujah when it comes to going to museums and looking at works of art up close.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to go near the picture. The guard may get a little grumbly if you put your nose against the varnish, but the fact is that artists are the best lookers in museums because they're looking on different levels. It isn't just the pleasure of the finished work; it's also for those technical insights. I would recommend everyone check out a book called The Artist Project, published by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which summarizes decades of visits by major artists living to the Met to see what they see. And there's a similar series of articles in the New York Times that you can easily Google, written by Michael Brenson and also Michael Kimmelman, on that same subject of going to the Met with a leading artist and seeing what they talk about. They're not doing the docent tour. They're talking about, oh, look at that impasto. I didn't know he did that. I could do that. Or I should do that. Or it is very interesting to hear what you just said, Michelle, because we realize that this journey of learning is never over. We're talking about senior artists who
Yeah.
still discover in the old masters something new.
Well, and like that famous quote from Michelangelo is, I can't remember if he was 87 or 78, but he said, "I'm still learning."
Yeah,
That's why he was so great, because
that's
we
right.
all have to be on that quest for learning. And yes, when I go to museums with friends of mine, we just talk shop, we talk technique, we figure
Yeah,
out things. And, also just even some of the more ephemeral stuff, like how did he pull off this technique, but still make the emotion come out of the eyes so strongly? Because I think the technique has to be excellent, but it has to not supersede the emotion. It's there to cultivate the emotion. And that's why we're drawn to portraits and can look at a portrait of someone we've never met before and enjoy looking at it, or a landscape or anything else.
right.
Um, but yeah, I'm very glad you brought that up, because looking at paintings from life in museums, that has been one of my greatest educators,
Yeah, good.
more than anything really, is that you just figure out things that even the best reproductions in a book doesn't show the full color, doesn't show the correct value.
No,
And
never.
so there's no substitution for that.
And I say that with love. We have great printers at Fine Art Connoisseur
Oh,
magazine, but we're very aware that never will it be the same as seeing the work of art in person. And that's just a simple fact. But if the magazine can drive you to go look at the painting, or look at comparable works by the same artist, then we've done our job. Let me ask you about what we're looking at on the film. The question of pose, you had established what you wanted for me, and then every now and then I would fidget and you would try to put me back to where I needed to be, which is totally
just very
understandable.
slightly, because we were talking the whole time, so I was expecting that.
You know how it is. I move my hands being Italian. The
You
fact
also
is
move
that,
your eyebrows a lot when you talk. I thought I can let him talk and do your eyes, and I had to for a moment be like, "Wait, Peter, stop talking so I can get your eyebrows," because you're very animated.
I remember these eyebrows are busy. But what happens? Obviously, there's this dialogue with your sitter where you say, "Okay, no, move back or stop this or whatever." Has there ever been in your experience a moment where, uh-oh, it's not coalescing? I'm not looking for trouble here, but I wonder, was there a moment where you had to rethink as it was underway? Maybe when you were young, I don't know.
Yeah, the only time is there were like a couple times when I was, say, in art school or an open studio, not a situation where I'm teaching. I'm
Sure.
very careful about the models I select. I actually prefer to work with non-professional models, but there are amazing professional models out there that I've worked with too, and I would work with them anytime. But every once in a while, someone, I show up to an open studio and someone is falling asleep and their head is moving like 3 feet, because they're
Yeah.
totally. So I was trying to paint a gentleman once, and I finally just realized it's like, well, I'm just going to paint it and then wipe it out and do another painting and wipe it out. And this is going to be a practice session, because it was impossible. And I could see people getting frustrated. I wasn't teaching, otherwise I would have plugged in with coffee, but things like that happen. And I think it's good for artists to, expect that, like going and sketching, animals or children, family members that are moving, or someone at a cafe or at a zoo, just to kind of get used to the fact that people aren't going to stay statically still. And getting the gesture, I think, is so much more important than getting all the details. You can always add the details in from a photograph. That's what a photograph gives you. But the gesture, the color notations, the limited range of values, the beautiful array of colors don't quite translate even in the most expensive cameras.
Yeah.
It's like looking through a filter. And just to mention one thing about color, and this is something that occurs when you are painting from life and then back in the studio, I'm using natural light. And you can see the light is progressively getting bluer. I was going to try to color correct it for the audience, but then I thought, no, this is authentic to what I was seeing. Now, I knew it was more blue because we had kind of blue hazy clouds. It was getting dark outside. I knew it was cooler light. So at that point, I'm relying a little bit, yes, on what I see, but also on what I know about my color mixtures, right? This on the screen is a little bit more how I was seeing it. I was seeing it more warm because I was at a slightly different angle than the camera, but it was still rather blue. When I take it into my studio and you see the close up before I start working on it in the studio, and in my studio, of course, I have color corrected bulbs, you can see all the beautiful array of color. Now, I
Yes.
was seeing that in your face because you were under a special spotlight, color corrected, that I brought that mimics a beautiful natural light source. And that can frustrate artists, right? Painting your canvas in a lighting that's too cool versus too warm, something you encounter in plein air quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
And you just have to make peace with it. And that's why it is essential to know what your colors do, have mixed them so much from life that you know a little bit of cad red here, a little bit of transparent oxide yellow here is going to produce this effect, so that you can compensate for those lighting situations.
Well, there's the hallmark of being a professional, that you have a handle on color knowledge to the extent that you can get out in front of the problem. And this reinforces my earlier point about anxiety and calm, knowing that this is not going to derail the whole project. You just have to compensate and, of course, plan to work on it later in a different way, in a different place, as you did. That's very heartening to hear. We all hope that for our medical doctors, if a surgeon is opening you up and finds something he didn't expect, he's experienced enough to know, I'm going to pivot now, and we're going to get this over here and go back to the original problem. And that is, again, the hallmark of a professional. I don't mean to make light of it. I'm full of respect.
You stated it, pivot. And although I don't usually have models move a lot where it's frustrating, there's constant pivoting throughout every oil portrait. And it's just, sometimes lighting change, sometimes a movement changes. If someone's wearing fabric, it can change. And I always tell students, don't chase the changes just because it's changed in front of you. Only change it if it will make your composition better and suit your vision that you want to create on canvas more clearly, make it stand out more. But otherwise, you don't want to be chasing things throughout your painting. But there are times where, a sitter will sit down. I think it happened with you when you put your scarf on. I'm like, oh, I'm going to take a photo now because I like how it's falling now against the side of your shirt. And so I might be working on the face, say if we're working from life, and maybe it's a classroom where I can't, just only be thinking about myself and my painting.
Right.
I can't change the pose. I might pivot from painting the face to painting the scarf in a 20-minute session, and then going back to painting the face, capturing things where they're situated in a way that I prefer when it's from life. And, you're working with a living, breathing model, and things are going to change. And that, I think one of the biggest things to think about from my student days to my more professional days is that as a student, I was really concerned with the model being still. I was concerned with the finished product. And I saw it as a struggle, like a magnificent struggle, a battle that you get to, you're exhausted, you slayed the dragon, you got it, and it was fun. But then I learned later, and then a large part of this is due to, spending time painting with Richard Schmid for the past 10 years before he passed, is to look with softer eyes than that. And coming from someone at his level of experience, he's like, don't look at it as a struggle. And Nancy Guzik would say the same thing. I look forward to when she starts teaching because she's an amazing teacher. Look with softer eyes. Your painting, and Richard said this, that your painting is a beautiful dance or communion between yourself, the sitter, and the painting. And you have to enjoy that. And you have to be in that moment. And if you struggle, and Robert Henry said this, I'm sure you've heard this quote, the artist doesn't struggle with the painting, the artist struggles within himself for order.
Yes.
And so when you're feeling disordered in your painting, it might be that you need to pay more attention to what you're doing on your palette, how to use your tools. I mean, you want to get to the point where you practice with, a similar set of brushes and your tools enough, your brushes, your palette, that you are in command of that. And you don't have to think about that. And then you can think of just the beautiful experience you're having. And you mentioned something about a doctor in an operation. I always use the metaphor that, a cardiologist might have all these altruistic reasons why he wants to save lives and become a heart surgeon, just like we do as an artist, right? We have those feelings usually at a young age or at some point in our life that we want to go learn our skill. When he's in the operating room or she is in the operating room, cutting into an artery and doing things like that, they're not thinking about all that beautiful, emotional stuff. They're just a technician. At this point, when I'm painting, I'm being a technician. I'm thinking, okay, this is a rectangular colored shape, warmer colored shape next to a triangular cooler shape, and there's a highlight in between, and that highlight needs to go more yellow. And I'm thinking very technical. At the end, when I'm back in my studio and I'm finishing off the eye, or a little bit maybe when I'm finishing the eye even from life, that's when all of a sudden I allow my brain to go into the direction of, does this look like Peter? Does this feel like this person that I'm painting. And you
Right.
have moments where you go into it and then you go back into the technical.
Cool. I love that push-pull idea, that's okay, that there is no one frame of mind on this kind of project, that it is an evolution that can ebb and flow back and forth. One detail question before I forget. I was struck by the fact that when I sat down, I had a subtly patterned blue shirt on, and you said, change it to white, please. And that's what we resulted with, right, in the finished work. I totally get it that basically you felt that that pattern, as subtle as it was going to be distracting or somehow not the point. When it comes to working with the client, the sitter, to choose the outfit, how does that go? Is there a dialogue, like a show and tell by Zoom ahead of time so that you know what they're hoping to wear, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great question. And part of the reason I could see why it would be the pattern. Now, if I was doing a portrait commission for you that I could work on an infinite amount of time on, not for
Yeah.
demo, I could totally, spend the time painting that pattern. But what I was looking at was the value. So the value did not show off your facial the color in your basically. With a portrait, I'm thinking less about the clothes, unless the clothes are very important to someone, and more about how it shows off their face. And that's what I was looking for.
Perfect.
But that being said, when I'm with a client, I try to take my own photographs. I prefer to do that and work with someone just personally. We do a lot of different outfit changes. I suggest some things, I have them choose some things, and then we go through the photos together and discuss that
Right.
before I start a large portrait.
Right. And of course, I was willing to defer to you because I wanted this to be a great demo, as opposed to, no, it's my favorite suit, I must be shown in this. That's a different energy. Yeah.
And so if it were that, I might choose to put a whiter background behind you, something
Right.
to make
Right.
your face pop amidst the clothing. So I would just, again, I like how you use that word, I'm going to borrow it from now on, pivot. I would just pivot to the client's needs, because when I work with someone, I want to create a treasured heirloom piece that they're going to enjoy in their family for generations to come. So I want to capture what they want, but they're also relying on my artistic knowledge to guide them as to what would look best, because what would look best in a photo doesn't necessarily look best in a painting.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. That's very well put. Yeah, indeed. Good.
great
Okay.
question.
No,
So
I just noticed. Yeah, please go ahead. Talk
I
about what
I
we're
see
seeing.
that, and I know there's just a little bit of a lag. So guys, I mean, just that's the nature of doing live, but we wanted to talk live. So I am now back in my studio. I'm not sure if you've already seen it, but I have a dry painting, and I took a little bit of walnut oil, and I covered the entire painting with walnut oil very sparingly, just to, one, make a grounding to adhere the new paint to, and it also works in the same way like a varnish, a temporary varnish, to bring out the darks, bring out the colors, so that I can really see the true color and mix and match accordingly as I continue on with the face. So oiling out with walnut oil is a really nice, way to then transition into working in the studio. Now your painting has to be completely dry. Richard Schmid warned me about that, because he said once he oiled out, it wasn't completely dry. He came back in the morning, the entire face had went down off the canvas onto the floor, and he had to repaint it. So yeah, so you need to make sure it's really dry and use the oil sparingly, because again, you still, I see a lot of students using too much medium. And I'll touch on one thing. Once I'm getting into the face and the skin tones, I am not using paint thinner. I'm not using a brush with paint thinner. I might use a little bit of oil sparingly just to make the paint flow, but you want to be in control of what is happening on the canvas. You don't want it to get away from you. And sometimes people add medium to get the paint on there easier, and that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to layer and let it kind of build the layers. So take your time and really push in the colors into the canvas, which you saw me do at the beginning of the video. And you see I'm wiping my brush with a paper towel rather than dipping into paint thinner, because if you dip into paint thinner, it's going to take off the paint off of the face, which can be very frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. I would imagine that's not going to help.
Happened to all of us.
Well, I must say, my heart stopped when I saw you put the oil on
Yeah.
just 4 minutes ago. I thought, wait, what is she doing? And now you've explained. So thank you very much. That all makes sense. That's a little scary as a maneuver to a stranger.
And one of the funnest things to me is to watch or to even create the mouth, because the mouth, if you notice, I'm not necessarily painting the bottom lip. I'm painting the shadow around the mouth, and then the bottom lip emerges, and I add a little bit of color and highlight onto it, and then the mouth just becomes visible. And it's always a really fun area to me to paint. And then you soften the
Interesting.
edges, and it looks like the person could open up and speak, and that really pulls the portrait together to me. And I think we need to, mouths are simpler than we think, but we
Hmm.
need to be very intentional about what we put in to
So
explain them.
on a human face, is there a single feature that is always going to be the most insightful, or does it vary from sitter to sitter? I mean, it sounds like such a stupid question, but people
No,
talk
it's
about
not
the
at all.
eyes as the windows to the soul, or is the mouth and its positioning insightful, etc.
Yeah, no, actually, it's a fantastic question, and I love how you put it, and it's a very important question, because of course we want in a portrait, generally, if depending on your intention, but most of the time you want a portrait just the eyes to shine out. That, like you said, window to the soul. The person is either looking at you or you kind of see them and you're just drawn to their eye. Um, Also the emotion that comes out. Now the eyes in a portrait are static. Yes, in person they're moving all the time, but where the emotion lies in a portrait is not in the edges necessarily around the eye, but it's the slight shifting of the inner corner of the eyebrows and the outer corner of the mouth. If say someone looks, it has a certain emotion that you don't like, they look angry or they look bored or whatever, play with not the outer corners of the eyebrow, but the inner corners, the part that moves when we're expressing ourselves, and the slight outer corners of the mouth, which you'll see me do with your mouth in a little bit to get a little hint of that smile that you know it shows that wit that I know you have, and I wanted to get that into the portrait. And so those two areas, when you play with them and you get them just the way you want, someone will look at the portrait and say, oh, the eyes have so much emotion. But it's really the areas around the eye.
Uh,
And talking a little bit about bringing up your lightest lights, your highlights. I bring them up in a portrait about 90% of the way until I get to the very finish, and then I pop them around the focal point. But right now you can see it's like the cheekbone, a little bit of highlight on the nose and the forehead. All that does is draw the viewer up to the eye, right? Because that's the eye and the light needs to be dominant. Even if if you have a sitter looking full fully at you, right? You
mhm.
have a face front on looking at you. One eye needs to be slightly more dominant. And that to me is not a style, it's how nature works. We can't look at both eyes at the same time. It's why when you see, something in a movie where someone's having an emotional moment, they're bouncing their eyes back and forth to the person they're looking at, because you can only focus on one eye. And for me,
Hmm.
I'm most interested in painting how the human eye sees. I would consider myself a naturalist painter.
Yeah.
And the human eye doesn't see like a photograph. It doesn't see everything in focus with a hard edge. Our human eye sees based on our emotion
Yes.
and what we deem important. And I've always felt that painting is a visual record of what you're paying attention to in life, quite simply.
Absolutely. That's
And
so well put.
so, thank you. And I've had a couple people say, well, no, if I'm in a crowded room and I'm seeing everyone at once. And I said, yeah, but if someone you love walks in that room, your spouse, your child, your parent, you zero in on them and everything in the periphery becomes abstract. So that to me is how I'm painting. And my focal point within the eye and the features is really, that's the heightened area of realism. I like to think of it almost like an archery target, because I used to do archery when I was younger
Cool.
and still do a little bit. But the inner bullseye would be realism, and that would be equivalent to your focal point, where you're looking and where you're telling the audience your interest is. And on you, you can see it's like the eye, the cheekbone, part of the mouth, the nose. The next ring out would be more impressionism. The furthest ring out would be abstraction. And that's not a style, that's just how the human eye sees. And so that's why I like to paint vignettes like this, because it isn't just a representation of the subject, right? Because you could take a photograph for that.
Sure. Right.
It's a representation of the subject and how I'm seeing the subject as an artist. And that's something Richard would always say. He said, every painting is a record of your subject, a record of your experience of your subject, and thirdly, of a moment in time.
Yes. Bingo. Absolutely. That's so powerful. And I love the fact that although we're all in the art world fretting about artificial intelligence, AI, it's quite clear so far that none of those AI mechanisms have been able to make a portrait that really convinces us, because of what you just said about a kind of asymmetry, about an emphasis on one eye or another, that's actually the joy of naturalism, of a thoughtful artist painting, a thoughtful person, that there is that element of interpretation which computers are not yet fully capable of. And that may never change. We don't really know. I'm not going to worry about it because, sorry?
I don't think it ever will replace
Right,
the
right,
human, you know?
right. Yeah.
And case in point, you know, like having just gone to Africa and I, you know, took photographs and have good lenses, and some lenses can mimic some things that you want to achieve. But I've been following a lot more photographers and wildlife photographers that live in Africa since I got back on Instagram. And what I'm seeing them talk about as artists in their field is that taking the picture is 20%. Everything else they do with focal point and abstraction and values and color, they do post edit. And so they're circling they're doing much like what we do with a brush with their photographs, circling areas, dark things to create their experience. And that's why a master wildlife photographer, it's not because he has the most or she has the most expensive camera. It's the post editing they're doing, which is the art. And they're just
they are artists, definitely,
with the brush, but a computer can't do it automatically.
Right. Exactly.
You know?
Yeah,
And
no matter how well programmed. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very
I
encouraging,
thank
I
God
think,
for that.
because yeah, I mean, first of all, we are glad about that, being art lovers, that we want to see artists still in work. But there's something very helpful about what you just said, because it sheds light on what we're watching here on film, that there is this way of looking that is unique to you, and that, you know, your take on me is going to be distinctive from another student of Richard Schmid, because you're different people, and that you have absorbed similar ideas and, you know, maybe comparable experiences out in the world of looking, but you are unique. And that I find very moving, actually. And that's something that we'll reinforce throughout Realism Live. Obviously, all of our presenters are unique talents with their own worldview and set of experiences.
And that's such a beautiful way to say it. And it's so important. And I mean, you know, I know you have, like Eric, you have some self-portraits on your wall, and they are all different aspects of you. So it's not just, part of it is that the artist and how they see and how they interpret the painting, yes, is different. But depending on the relationship you have with that person, they're going to see different aspects of you and put that in the painting. So I've been painted a few times by people, and I have two in my studio. One is for Michael Shane Neal, and
Sure.
he painted me with a little bit more of a smile, looking at him. My parents love that portrait. I love it too. It really captures like my personality.
Yeah.
It's completely different than the portrait Richard painted of me, which I
Yes.
love equally as
Yes.
much. Now, Richard knew me. As a painter, we painted together. I get it really serious. You know, I know I'm smiley all the time, but when I'm painting, I get a real serious expression on my face. So he painted me with that really serious expression. And some people are like, oh, I can't tell because you're not smiling.
Yeah.
But he knew me in a different capacity. And I love that he painted me as the serious artist, because I am laser focused when I'm creating.
Yeah.
And maybe you saw that sitting and looking at me and seeing my face. Maybe
Sure.
I'm not aware of what I'm doing, but
yes. And I didn't want to get in the way of that. Obviously, we were chatting, and then every now and then we would fall silent, which is normal. You know, that's to be expected. We had Libby around for entertainment, so that was fine. She kept us stimulated, but it wasn't continuous conversation. There was definitely moments of real work. And, you know, I love that. I mean, I'm just in awe of artists, especially great ones like you. The question of the setting of the frame. I'm just looking behind you. How do you select? And that's a beautiful frame. I assuming it's modern, but in the traditional style.
Yes. So this
How do you go about that?
um well, this is just a frame I had in the studio that was the right size.
Right, right,
What I would do is get one without the sgraffito, unless I think it would
right.
show off your face a little bit more. I do love this hand painted design, and this is a Rhett
Yes,
Ashby frame. He's also an amazing artist, but he's an amazing artist with frames, contemporary frame maker. But when you get his frames, it looks like something you would see in the Uffizi in Italy,
right, exactly.
works
Yeah,
of art themselves. But I think, and this goes into like the scarf, or how I would, or
yeah,
the shirt, how I would choose like a pattern or no pattern. I think it would be stronger if I had a frame that was just simple,
right.
just right,
Got it.
because then my eye goes right to your eye.
Yeah,
Um, but then again, when you're working with a client, it depends on their home and what their
of
decor
course.
is as well. So I always pick different kinds of frames, let
Sure.
them choose, but I pick things that I think look really good on the painting, because you want.
Right. You're going to guide them in a certain direction, and then you can't do everything. You have to let them feel some power. Yeah, good. Yeah. No, I just think that's an important piece of it. We all have seen a marvelous painting in a terrible frame, and it just all falls apart so quickly. So I just am mindful of that. We try to cover framing issues in the magazine when we can, just to remind people that they shouldn't take that so lightly, although it can be terribly expensive.
And I think if I had done the patterning on your shirt, or a little more patterning on, if I was using this frame, I would maybe add that, because it would add to the ornateness of it. So,
Right.
I like it 90%. I just like it more with this, and that's personal taste. And I'm just looking at how it quote unquote frames your face,
Yeah.
rather than the frame. But I do love his frames. They're really extraordinary. We
Say
have a
his name again, please.
Rhett Ashby
Thank you.
and
Thank you.
Ashby Works frames. So
Great.
Masterworks, another company I work with, both of them do extraordinary frames and really help artists out, with giving them discounts, as, it is expensive to frame, but their frames come and they're just like, I get excited when I put my artwork in their frames, or
Yes.
when I put it in a Rhett Ashby frame. I'm just like, oh, it's gorgeous. It just pulls it all together. And it's so nice to get a gorgeous frame and then see it kind of complete your painting. So.
Exactly. It is part of the ensemble. The most famous example of that is Whistler, who insisted on framing his own works and would not have the client ever unhouse them because it was all
Oh,
meant to be together. So he was really fierce about
that makes me think of a very important aspect to all the portrait painters out there that might do commissions. Never show your painting unframed. Never
it.
show it. Always put it in a frame, even if it's not the frame you're going to give them, if they're going to frame it themselves later, but show it framed, show it. It's just like doing a beautiful table setting for a great meal. It's just very
Right.
important for it to all come together in that way. The only people that see my work unframed is when I do a demo in a workshop,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's very good advice. Thank you. I hadn't thought of that, not being in that line. It makes sense that that would be somehow off to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, now if your client was a fellow artist, then they can imagine it. But most of the
Right.
time, our clients aren't artists, so they don't see our vision, they just see the product. And it's very important that we present our vision in the most complete way.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Got it. I'm looking at the area around my head now. You've just sort of mapped that out very loosely,
Mhm.
and presumably we're going to see more later
Yes, we
of
are
the
gonna see
filling
that.
in. Yeah, good.
And I
Um,
hadn't decided when at this point in the video, or even when I was painting from life, if I were going to put the books in the background. I thought it was very interesting how we were in your home office and there were books behind. And I thought initially it would be great to paint that in. I realized that would then turn into a 2.5 hour demo that it wouldn't
right,
work.
right.
So I'm looking for the objective. And what I wanted to do is, once I got in some of the shirt and see how that white just all of a sudden makes all the colors in your face pop, that was the perfect
Absolutely.
white. So the blue shirt was just as lovely, but I'm looking at what it would do for your face.
Amen.
And once I get some of the shirt in, some of your jacket in, and scarf, I realized to really make your eyes pop, I thought it would be more effective to slightly darken the background. And that is about the value the background looked to me, even with the books. When I squinted down,
Yeah,
again, as heard, it's very important to squint. If I looked at the books, I would see all these little details and colors and the type, but that's not how it appears when I'm looking at your face. And whenever we're painting anything in the periphery, again, to show the experience, our personal experience as an artist of our subject, we need to make note of how things look in the periphery when we're looking at the focal point. So if I'm looking at your eye, those books become darker. They almost become like a dark abstract background.
Yep.
And so again, I could have painted them in there a little bit more, but I decided to keep it simple in the background, but I knew that value had to go darker to really show off your face better.
Brilliant. That makes perfect sense. It's all coming together now. I can see, it's funny. I posed the question and then boom, there you are with filling in the shirt, the scarf, the jacket, etc. Much as I love hyperrealism or photorealism, I get a little bit anxious sometimes because everything is in the same degree of sharpness. And that is simply not the way I see the world. I feel like over caffeinated sometimes when I'm looking at those paintings. And that's
that I'm sorry,
sorry.
I didn't interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, just to say that there is merit in that kind of art. I'm not suggesting that we don't cover it in the magazine or I don't like to go see it in the museums or galleries, but it is an interesting point you make about the way we actually experience the world as humans, that we're not seeing all of that detail, every blade of grass worked out entirely. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that because I love looking at high realist art too. I mean, I was just in New York and seeing the Flaming June that's on display. Yep. Talk about a frame that completes a painting. Oh my goodness. But, everything's quite like more detailed out in the periphery, and it's about the whole design, and the emotion lies within the pose of the model. Beautiful painting. I love the painting. But he had a different objective in how he painted. And I love that kind of art too, but it's not how I see the world.
Yes.
And I think that's the key, as artists,
yep.
We don't want to get caught up in seeing how someone else does it. We want to learn from it, but we don't want to copy unless it's for learning technique. But we're here to share how we see the world. And that viewpoint is unique to each of us. And I think we need to get in touch with that so that we can put it in our paintings, because who else is going to do it if you don't do it?
Exactly. That's right. This is very much about that subjective self. I feel like the Flaming June by Leighton is a great example. I'll flash a copy of it up on the screen in just a minute. I have one handy up just so people know what we're talking about. But it seems to me that idea of naturalism as something that to me is much more connective to my own experience, that's just how I see the world too. And I think most of us would agree. We may not want to see the world like that. Maybe we do want that sort of superhuman, almost computer-like X-ray vision, but it's probably not possible. So this is something, to me, superior as a portrait anyway. So I'm looking at the film again. There you are going for that top left area and the right.
Yes,
putting in some darks.
Just a technical note, because I'm putting this in, I originally put in that background with paint thinner. I do not want to use paint thinner at this point. It would run into your face. I would lose control of the painting. I'm using a little bit of walnut oil to mimic the look of paint thinner, very minimally, the least amount. So you see, I'm taking my time. So, something again, that Richard Schmid would always say, looseness is the way a painting looks. It's not the way a painting's done.
Yes.
And so I'm making the brush strokes look loose because anyone outside of seeing this video, they would assume I painted that first. And that's what I want it to look like. I don't want it to look like I painted around your head, but I'm carefully doing that and realizing I need to kind of get the white of the canvas a little bit more subdued. Now here down at the bottom, I've switched to paint thinner. I don't have to worry about that running down. And in fact, I like those kind of little drips, that, make it artistic at the bottom and create an abstraction. But when I get up near the face, I'm using oil. So that goes a little bit into, knowing your tools, knowing what they do. And this is where painting from life is so essential. Going to an open studio workshop, just getting out there and paint from life, even if it's uninstructed, and not be committed to like a finished or, painting isn't precious. It's just an hour and a half study, and you try all these techniques and you learn what your brushes do. You learn what your mediums do. You learn what your paint does. And that is so key. Another difference when I was younger, and most artists when they're younger see their paintings as like their children, like they're so precious. I don't see my paintings like my children, or they're like children that are ready to go off to college and live with someone else. It's like I want them to go and live in someone else's home. What I do see precious is the attention in the moment and enjoying the process of painting, and my knowledge that I'm doing and communing with the model. That's the preciousness. Right.
Well put. So here is a detail of that famous Flaming June picture that Michelle was mentioning. I hope you can see it on the screen. This is not the full composition, nor does it include the frame, but it is on view at the Metropolitan Museum in New York until February 2024. So try to come to New York and see it if you haven't seen it in Puerto Rico, where it normally lives.
It's an incredible painting to see in person. It's right in the same hallway as the Joan of Arc, Jules Bastien-Lepage painting, which is another one of my favorites. Both stunning work. I hope they can see it. I actually don't know if we're on the screen or not during this. So.
Oh, sorry. I think it's coming through. If they can see my head, they can see the picture. If not a worry. We will get something into the chat when we're going through the questions. I can absolutely put a web link in for that picture. But I'm glad that Michelle mentioned it, because it's not a work normally associated with hyperrealism, but in fact, she's right. Every detail is worked out. And that is an artist that she loves and I love, one of the great British 19th century painters. That I'm looking again at the screen, watching this portrait of me take shape. It's so exciting the way that you were able to edit your footage. Bless you.
Yes, and I'm really trying to show as much of the painting, and it makes me realize how much of the time I'm looking, I look about 3 times more than I paint.
Yeah.
And because I'm taking out the pauses, I don't, change my brushes that fast. I was trying to show most of just the painting process and leaving it as pure and as uncut as possible. And it just made me realize, like, it really was about an hour. I thought I'd need more time of painting time, but it probably took a total of 4 to 5 hours because of when I'm pausing to look, pausing to assess, really take my time to mix my colors. And there's a kind of a term I've used with students. We're all familiar with the carpenter's rule. Look, right, measure twice, cut once. I like to say the artist's rule, my artist's rule,
Yeah.
is look 3 times, paint once. So I will look at the model, mix the color, then I'll look at the model, place the brush ready to put the stroke on my canvas, then look at the model and then make the stroke. And it seems tedious at first, but when you get into the practice of doing that, and I started doing that when I was younger and a student and the values weren't quite right or the color wasn't quite right because I was impatient and I was rushing. Taking the time to do that, even if you only get an eye done in a painting session, I'd rather have an excellently done, accurate eye than an entire face that's not quite right. And that's how I, kind of went through the process of teaching myself in uninstructed classes. And that's how I paint now. And it allows me to paint in this way and try to, and achieve really close accuracy right from the beginning. There are always adjustments that need to be made, but it's 90% accurate right from the beginning, which leads to just a more enjoyable painting experience. But you have to be patient with it and you have to pace yourself for a marathon, not a sprint, so to speak,
Another hallmark of the professional. Absolutely. I mean, that is something that we just need to honor, that it takes experience and good instinct to get to that understanding that this is the way it needs to be. And the 3-to-1 rule makes perfect sense to me. Absolutely. And I'll just say one thing, if the eye is off and you start going forward, you've got a problem at the end of the road, because everyone's going to focus on that eye. In cityscapes, I'm always looking toward the cars. How did the artist depict a car? Because we all know what a car looks like. And if it's off, if it looks like a toy car, like a Matchbox, we automatically throw the painting out of whack.
Yes.
Unless it's deeply intentional to be, jokey. So little cues like that, you learn to look as you see more art in your life.
That is true. I remember Richard saying in a flower painting, the first thing he looks at is the leaves.
Yeah.
Just
Exactly.
to see. And
Yeah. Sure.
yes,
Yeah,
because it broke it off. And I think I ironically learned this in painting. At the same time, I built my first set of bookshelves and I thought I could do it on my own. And the first, T of the, square of the bookshelf, I'm like, it's off a little bit, it's fine. Well, by the end, that whole bookshelf was crooked and it was unusable. And it's the same thing in painting, so we just have to go, only as fast as accuracy will allow and take our time with it. And, another thing that helped me see that was, well, I love to read. I'm a voracious reader like yourself. And a quote by Maya Angelou. And I just substitute, she uses the word temple and I substitute in the word painting. She said, seek passion and patience in equal amounts. Patience alone will not build the temple painting.
Right.
Passion alone will tear down its walls.
Mm.
So patience alone will produce a painting that's technically accurate but uninteresting to look at. Passion alone will create a really lively, beautiful painting that might have the drawing off. And my goal is always to have the two. Just
Yes.
again, going back to that correlation of music, get the notes in the right place, which is the anatomy, the placement, the spatial shapes, and even I would say values. Getting the value structure falls into that notes and the construction. But the way it's played is the brushwork, the edges, colors interpreted. We all see colors slightly differently. The way you play up those parts of the painting, that creates the music, that creates the symphony, that creates the emotion.
Well put. Yes, Maya Angelou, always eloquent. I'm glad
Yes,
you
I
have
that quote.
focused on that. Yeah, brilliant. Bravo. Okay, and there we are. That's exciting. A lovely way to finish. Oh,
Yes, that was our photo from a previous conference.
that's right. That's right. Exactly. Hooray for face. Yes. Good. Okay. Fantastic. So as far as I can tell, the film has completed. What I'm going to do, if everyone will bear with me, is go to questions, which are, I believe, assembled by our team. Okay. Oh, we have lots of questions, Michelle. I think you have electrified people. This is great.
I hope you guys all enjoyed it. I mean, this is just the start of an amazing 3 days that they have put together. It's just an incredible event. So I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Questions already, so I don't want to be selfish. We are doing fine on time. So I'm going to jump to questions that are grouped very kindly by the moderators into some areas. Now, a lot of these are technical, Michelle, so please feel free to go as
I
deeply
love
or
talking
as
about technical stuff too. So I am an art
okay,
nerd when it comes to that.
great. Andrea asks, do you need the same lighting on the model that you need on your canvas?
Well, the answer is no. You saw I did not have the same lighting. It's preferable. I was coming to New York right from South Africa.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm taking two lights with me, you know. So it's preferable, but again, I relied on my knowledge to mix the colors and knowing that I was painting in a little bit of cooler light. But if you can, it's always nice, and it makes it just easier for you as an artist.
So related questions. Elaine asks, what is that light bulb that gives the natural colors?
So it's just these these lights, they're like an LED kind of screen light. I don't know the technical name for them, but I have a softbox light in my studio, which is a photographer's light. But these ones you can get on Amazon, you can get at any of the photography stores. It's just like a small rectangular flat screen. And on the back, the key one for artists you want to look for is that it goes lighter and darker and warmer and cooler. So I can control the color temperature of the light. And it's just a nice supplement. I always love to use natural light, but I hadn't been to your place before and I didn't really know what to expect. So I brought the light so I could control that a little bit more.
Rosina asks,
they're not that expensive, you know, and they have, some of them have remotes even. They're really handy.
Good. Rosina asks, I wonder about the setup. You mentioned painting in the home of a child. How do you set up? Is it like plein air?
So in the home of a child, usually, I mean, it depends on the age of the child. Usually a child cannot sit from life, but you don't want to rely solely on photographs, right? When you're painting a child or working on a commission, I like to ask the parents if I can spend a couple days coming over. The first day, I get on the floor, I play with the child, I have my camera so they get used to it, I take pictures, I give those to the parents, right? But I get to know the personality of the child. It takes children sometimes, you know, even an hour to start acting natural in front of you. Have the parent there, you know, so they feel comfortable. Really get to know them because you're trying to capture not just a likeness, but a bit of their spirit, a bit of their essence on the canvas. And then the second day is when I take my professional pictures. And at that point, they're not looking at me just going, cheese, you know, and smiling.
Right.
And that's when you get the pictures to paint from.
Good. The question from Lori is there a typical distance you sit from the canvas and from the sitter in your setting up?
Yes, I guess, I sit in front of my canvas so that I can extend my arm
Yeah.
and just naturally. So I guess that's, what, 2 or 3 feet from your canvas. I don't want to be really up close to my canvas. I want to use my whole arm when I paint and not be using like my wrist and doing a lot of detail work, because I really want to create like a sense of gesture, even when I'm getting into just little nuances of the face. You notice I was turning my brush on the demo and kind of laying the paint on in different ways. And that helps create like just a more fluid dynamic to me, drawing and design, an application of the paint. I think you were about 5 or 6 feet away from me.
Yes,
Or-
that's right.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So I
Exactly.
don't really
Yep.
pay attention to that. I'm just kind of looking at the light and where I can see the face. That said, though, I don't always need to sit close. I mean, I tell students when I teach a workshop, when I go to uninstructed classes, I prefer to like go in the back, because then I
Yep.
don't have to squint. I can just mass in the structure, and you can walk up close and look at the detail and go back and put it into your painting.
Mhm.
And they say Sargent did that, wore out the space between us easily.
Wore it out.
So that's more preferable. I might have sat you further back if we had had more room in the
Yep.
room, but I was on one end, you were on the other, but it was fine because we were just, a head and shoulder portrait. But
Right.
that's a good.
It is a very good point. Absolutely. Beatrice asks, when you are toning before going to the focal point, do you always have the same general toning hues, or do you change it from for each person that you're painting, each sitter?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I don't do it the same way every time. I mean, I have certain ways that I like to start, but I have a variety of ways I start, maybe, 4 to 6 different kind of ways. And that doesn't really have to do with the background. I do like to tone the background as I'm sitting there rather than use a pre-toned canvas, because it allows me to use a clean brush as an eraser, so to speak, and sculpt out the form. So I'm not dealing with dry paint right from the beginning. But it is really important to practice different ways to begin, different ways to process through the painting, because different situations call for different techniques. So you want to
Yes.
think of it like, think if you have this like, bag, the Mary Poppins bag with your repertoire of techniques that you see the model and you're like, this is what I want to create. So now I can pull out this technique and I can use it to create my vision on canvas, rather than just having one way of doing it. And that's why I always encourage people to take from multiple instructors, because as long as they're teaching the great elements of painting, the application, it's good to know different ways to get to the same outcome.
Such
Right.
good advice. And that's why Realism Live has so many instructors, that we want to present different worldviews. And then you can sort of follow your path as you wish, as you're customizing your own training. Sandra asks, I noticed that the first line you put down looked like it was across the two eyelids. Can you talk about that first establishing stroke?
Yes, and again, if you watch the presentation following this, I will talk about that. You'll see that. So the first thing I look for in a portrait, because I'm not looking at it from the outside, right? At the outside in, I'm looking at it from the inside out. So I want to establish the tilt of the eye line and the center line of the face. And that's an approximation. So I'm just kind of drawing through the middle of the eyes. That, if you're looking at my face on screen, if you're painting someone with a tilted head, rather than getting the outline of the head, getting that cross. That cross is always parallel. If you do a line horizontally and the middle line is kind of skewed, more like an X than a cross, you're off, because this is always completely, like a cross shape in the face. And so that, I think, is more useful when you're starting a painting than worrying about the outer periphery at that point.
Very good advice. Georgina asks, often people talk about the process of doing darks first. I noticed that you are working in all values to start. Can you explain that, please?
Wait, can you repeat the question for a minute?
Of course. Yep. Georgina asks, often people talk about the process of doing darks first. I noticed that you are working in all values to start, as you start, I guess. Can you explain that?
Yes, and I think that's a little bit has been misinterpreted down the line, working dark to light. I misunderstood that when I was starting out. I would put a lot of dark paint everywhere, and then you're trying to lighten it, it just turns to mud, right? What I realize is depending, and this is completely dependent upon how the lighting is set up with the model, but case in point, the way I set up Peter, having a shadow side, it was kind of more Sargent-esque light, having a shadow side, having a triangle of light in there, having a lighter side on 3/4 of his face. So I know where the shadows are going to be, and I want to lay those in first transparently with transparent paint so that it really reads truly as a shadow. Then I'm going in with a middle tone, kind of a middle lighter tone on the rest of the face. And before I would work in this kind of puzzle piece mosaic way, I would block in the whole face and do like kind of a mid-tone, and then you work up to the lights because you want the highlights to be popped on top. One reason is to construct the values that way, and also as a textural difference. Usually the shadows, you want to keep them thinner because it's the absence of light. You don't want the track marks of the brush picking up and reflecting the light because that will disrupt the shadows. But I do want it, say on the highlight on your forehead, I want a thick, juicy brush stroke there that does catch the light and bounce it off and enhance the light that I'm trying to convey in the painting. So I'm working it that way. As I've progressed from painting extensively from live, I kind of do that from the eyes out, have the shadow, have the mid-tone, but you do notice I brought up the lightest lights a little more towards the end. And so that's what that means, kind of going dark to light. It's not putting dark paint where the highlight's going to be. Keep them separated, right? Keep your light and dark separated, and then look for the beautiful array of color. Another thing to make note of is the greatest area of chroma and color and detail exist where the light and shadow meet. And that's something to look for. That's really beautiful in a painting and beautiful in life to see.
Thank you. Catherine Ann asks, when you were blending the light reflection on the forehead, you used a large brush. What was that?
What was the brush?
Uh,
Actually, am I allowed to say? So it's a new brush that's coming out that I've been working on with Rosemary called the Bravura brush. And
Cool.
I'm not sure exactly what kind of hair. It's maybe a mix of synthetic and hog hair. It's a little softer than a hog hair brush, but it's very stiff and it can lay on some highlights. And she sent me some samples to try. I think they're coming out soon. And I loved it. And it's something I'll be adding, into my work.
Fantastic. Great. So Lena asks, how would you check for accuracy if you're a beginner? Do you measure first or paint first, then check?
That is a really good question. So as a beginner, I think measuring first is key. So if, say, you establish one thing first and then measure things off from that. So usually it's the eye socket, because that's a natural area of contrast within the face, or the area between the eyebrows, which is called like the keystone shape. If you think of an architecture, you could probably speak better to this, Peter, but in architecture, like the eyebrows and the eye sockets are like the archways, and then the keystone shape above the pillar supports the weight. So I always kind of look for that eye socket, keystone shape, eyebrow, bridge of the nose, the bridge of the nose being the bonier area and usually having a harder edge to establish first. Once you establish those three little areas, and it's really just a dark shape, a mid-tone shape, a lighter shape, harder edge, softer edge, then you measure everything off from that. And if you're new to drawing or painting from life, you can, use measuring techniques and like hold your arm out in front of you, use a pencil, use a paintbrush to kind of measure and compare and kind of make a little tick mark on your painting and know how far down the nose is. But one of the things I like to do, rather than jumping from the eyes to the nose or the nose to the mouth, is measure in smaller increments. And it's like, again, thinking of the face like a puzzle pieces of colored, skin tone or a mosaic, when you see mosaics done with tile, is I'll measure from the eye to the bottom of the eyelid, to the inner corner or the outer corner of the nostril to the inner corner, of the nostril to the bottom of the nose, rather than jumping from the eye to the bottom of the nose. And that makes for more accuracy because you're measuring in smaller shapes.
Good. Makes sense.
I'm always measuring. A lot of people think I'm not when they see me paint a demo. I am measuring, but I'm measuring visually. Now, I don't really need to do that with my brush, except if I get off course and need to double back and fix something. But I'm measuring optically as I'm going. And good painting is good drawing, and good drawing is good measuring. It's an essential part.
Hear, hear. So the great Michael Mentler asks, do you use palette knives to paint?
Yes, I love palette knives. Hi, Michael. And Michael's a superb draftsman, and I believe he's presenting as well.
Absolutely.
So I brought a palette knife just because I knew there'd be a really cool highlight if I set you up in the light on the forehead. And so I love to use palette knife. I love to use it in portraiture. I love to use it in bigger paintings in unexpected places or landscapes. It just adds a textural difference. And again, it is a way to orchestrate the eye throughout a rhythmical movement through the painting or accentuate an area of interest. You don't want to overuse it, but it's a tool to draw the eye and direct the eye of the viewer to what you're deeming most important. So it's a great thing to use in eyes and shapes.
Great. Two brushes, one to blend and one to paint, or are you blending with the same brush after you wipe the paint off? And then Deb asks, does Michelle clean her brush at every stroke or use a different brush for each color? So kind of together.
No, it's a great question. So it is, you'll be astounded at the amount of brushes I use in one painting. So you probably saw, Peter, because I was painting from life, and we couldn't show everything because I was doing it myself without a camera crew, but I probably used about 40 brushes just in the live session from this, and probably more in the session at home. So I do not clean my brushes with paint thinner. If I'm going back, I do separate the colors on the brushes. I'll have a warm brush, a dark brush, my red brush, my, cooler brush. And then the different hairs of the brush do different types of marks. So in an average painting day, like a 5 to 8 hour painting day, or sometimes a 14-hour painting day, I might use 200 brushes. Will dirty 200 brushes. I say it's my guilt-free movie watching time at the end of the day because I got to clean all these brushes. But and using different brushes, yes, the hairs do different things, but there's so much you can do with a clean brush. And I learned pretty quickly that it's a trade-off, right? The more brushes you use, the cleaner and clearer your color stays in your painting. And I'd rather have the painting look better and have to clean a lot of brushes than be stingy with my brushes and have muddy color in my painting. So it's really to keep the lights and darks separate, the warms and cools separate, to create that sense of luminosity and atmosphere in a painting.
That makes sense. Lori asks, why are you using walnut oil versus a linseed? Is it because of the sheerness or the drying time?
So there are a couple different reasons I prefer walnut oil. Linseed oil is fine to use. Linseed oil is a little thicker in consistency. It's a little stickier, and it has been known, and you can probably speak to this more, Peter, than I, but it's been known to yellow over time. And so with varnishing, it needs to be taken off. Walnut oil, conservators believe, is not going to yellow in the same way that linseed oil yellows. And so there's that aspect of it. I also really like that walnut oil has a thinner consistency. I don't use the culinary kind, which is very thin and runny, but I use like the M-gram, walnut oil. It's an art kind. It has a thicker consistency, but not as thick as linseed oil. So I don't like my brushes getting thick and gunky as I'm working. I want the purpose of the oil is to let it flow, the paint to flow, like as if it was fresh paint out of the tube, or to layer. And I find walnut oil does that beautifully. It's also not toxic at all, so that's a concern of mine, to keep the toxicity down.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to wrap things up. I want to pose two questions that are related. One is about, can you be clear about how much time passed before you started the second session that you showed us? And is there a minimum or maximum amount of time to update or change a painting? Related question then, can you break out the percentages of time that we saw? Like the first half was with me, the second half back in the studio. If you could just kind of survey the minutes or hours involved.
Okay. Yeah. So let me remember all the questions. So the time between was about a week because I spent another week in Vermont and then got back and the painting had dried already. So yes, about a week in between drying. There is no length of time. You could go back into something years and years and years later, right? As long as you haven't put a varnish on it. If you've put a varnish on it, then you need to take that off. But as long as it's unvarnished, you can always go back into work into it. There are different ways, and you can, look on conservators' websites how to get the new paint to adhere to the old paint. One of the best ways is walnut oil. It just creates like a little bit of a better adhesion. It's not necessary. The new paint will adhere to the old paint, but it just makes it easier and it helps you see your values and colors better, but you use it sparingly. And then as far as the time, it really was divided in half, kind of like you saw his face divided in half. I probably spent a little bit more time in the studio just because it's much harder to interpret from a photograph than it is from life.
Yes.
And it probably wouldn't have taken me half the time to do your jacket and your shirt from life. And from life, I could have probably done that honestly in about 6 or 7 minutes. At home, it took me more like 10 or 15 minutes because I'm having to really squint down at the photograph. I put the photograph on my computer. You see it over here. I push it back so it kind of mimics someone in the room, put you life size. but a photograph gives me way too much information. So it's just harder to squint and edit from a photograph than from life. So I always prefer to paint from life, but just know it's going to take a little bit more time to get that visual look and problem solve from a photograph.
Got it. Thank you.
I answered all the questions, right?
You got them all. That's fantastic. I'm very impressed. In fact, there are other questions. What we're going to do is share those with Michelle, and we're going to ask her to address them in one chunky chat later. That will be easy enough to arrange, so that people can find out her responses to some of those questions that didn't get hit. We want to try and keep this program to schedule. We're right on course. That was 1 hour plus 20 minutes. We're so grateful for all the questions, but more importantly, we're really grateful to Michelle for everything she's contributed to us today and before. It's been a great pleasure, as ever, reconnecting with you. Thank you for your...
You can tell Peter and I love to talk about art. We could go on for hours. Thank you guys all for showing up wherever you are in the world. We appreciate you, and just know that you can create the thing you want to create and be inspired. And I just, we're all rooting for you to be the portrait artists and the artists you want to be. That's why we're all here, to help you on your path.